And you think, well, what was the universe like 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago?
Dr. Stephen Meyer exposes that atheism has been eclipsed. They had their run and now it is over because of so many scientific findings coming out that proves there has to be a designer and a creator. So let's get right into it. Shout out to Dr. Stephen Meyer. Go subscribe to his channel. I believe he just started this channel not too long ago, so subscribe and get him to hundreds of thousands of subscribers. He definitely deserves it because all the work he has done. So let's get into it.
Even more important was what was discovered as a result of the light coming from these galaxies. Turns out that the light was redder than the scientists expected. You know how if you shine light through a prism and it separates into colors, the red through to the blue and the violet, and the red light has a long wavelength. And if an object is emitting light and moving away, it will cause the wavelength of the light to stretch out, and it will look redder than it would otherwise look. So the light coming from the gases in these faraway galaxies looked redder than similar light would look coming from if we looked at it in the spectra in a laboratory. And they call this the red shift. In other words, the wavelength was stretched out. It's kind of like the Doppler shift with sound. When if a train whistle goes by, it goes, the sound, well, that's the wavelength of the sound stretching out. The same thing happens with light. And so the scientists were able to discern that the galaxies are actually moving away from us. That's what the red shift meant.
Wow.
Now that had incredible implications for the question of the origin of the universe itself.
Dang. Everyone for the longest time was like, the universe has always been. It's been here for infinity. But all along they could have just opened up their Bible, went to Genesis and said and read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Right there. It says that God created the heavens and the earth. That means there was a beginning, there was an origin, there is a creator. And you say, well, I don't know. Nothing could have made something. Really? I don't think so. So I'm going to ask. So it's funny how everyone will admit that someone made this microphone, someone made these glasses. These glasses just didn't come here from nothing. These headphones didn't just come here from nothing. It had a designer, this computer, this wall, this painting behind me. That was all created. But when we look at ourselves, no, you weren't created. You evolved. Sure.
Hubble used data from an unsung hero in astronomy named Vesto Slipher about this red shift. And so here's the implication of all this. If the galaxies are moving away from us in every direction, in the forward direction of time, the only way that could be true is if there is a kind of spherically symmetric expansion of the universe, that everything is expanding in the forward direction. So if we think of, I got a visual aid, in the forward direction of time, you have the universe getting bigger.
This is amazing.
Bigger and bigger. And the galaxies, every galaxy getting further and further away from every other galaxy.
I should name this, Stephen Meyer uses balloon to prove the existence of God.
Bigger and bigger. And the galaxies, every galaxy getting further and further away from every other galaxy. But if you wind the time clock backwards, if you back extrapolate, and you think, well, what was the universe like 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000, or however far back you go, eventually you get to the point where all that galactic material is going to congeal or would have come back to the same point, a point marking the beginning of the expansion of the universe and arguably the beginning of the universe itself. And so we have, from observational astronomy, the first hint that the universe has not been here eternally. It's not eternal and self-existent, but rather it had a beginning. This is one of Hubble's.
That's amazing. I think there's so many aspects within the Bible that has shown all along that the Bible had the answers. God had the answers. It's fascinating. Obviously, the Bible is not a scientific book, and we shouldn't go to it to know exactly how math works and how scientific equations work. No, that's not what I'm saying. But nothing that we find debunks the Bible. And a lot of things within the Bible also is not meant to be taken literally. Some of it's meant to be taken historically. Some of it's meant to be taken as a hymn or a song or a poem. Some of it's meant to be apocalyptic. Like so many different genres of literatures. And that's okay.
Showing that there was a law, the further out the galaxies are, the faster they're moving away. And that, again, can only be true if the universe is expanding in this spherically symmetric way. Now, about this time, actually a little before this time, there was a famous physicist with really bad hair who had come to a very similar conclusion, and this was Albert Einstein. He was in the 19-teens, still working in Germany. Eventually he came to Princeton to escape the Nazis, but in the teens he came up with another theory, a new theory of gravity known as general relativity. And we talked a little bit about this last night, but it's basically the conceptual idea behind it is that matter causes space to bend, such that other matter passing through that space will have its motion changed by those preferred lines of trajectory. So as a result of this, he's thinking, well, if matter causes space to bend, then that means that if all you have in the universe is that gravitational field, then everything should be collapsed onto itself into something like a black hole. But we don't live in a universe like that. We live in a universe where there's massive bodies separated by empty space. So there must be some countervening force of expansion to offset the gravitational force, which means that the universe must be in some way dynamic. There's something pushing outward. But if something's pushing outward, then it would imply that there could have been a beginning.
Oh.
And that troubled Einstein. Because at this point in his career, it was different later, but at this point in his career, he was very much a scientific materialist. And so he posited something. It was kind of a fairly arbitrary conjecture on his part, but he proposed that this outward pushing force, which he called the cosmological constant, had exactly the right magnitude so that the outward push was exactly balanced by the gravitational pull, and you had a universe that was static, neither expanding.
Wow. Right there. Creator. Instantly, when you think about it, creator, it has to be. If something is perfectly put together, if you walk into a room and realize, like, all the books are in order, all of the tables are cleaned and put together and designed and looking so beautiful, you wouldn't think that happened by accident, that happened by design. No, you would think that someone was in there organizing and designing it.
Contracting. It was kind of a contrived value that he assigned to this, but it worked to eliminate the idea of a beginning. And for a time, for him, that was a sigh of relief. But then in the 20s, other physicists started working with these equations, and they realized, that's pretty contrived, Einstein. That would be an incredible degree of fine-tuning to have that cosmological constant with exactly the value that you, Einstein, chose for it. The math allows a lot of other values that most other values would imply a dynamic universe. That's thing one. And then this amazing physicist, a Belgian Catholic priest named Father Lemaitre, is with Einstein at a conference in the 20s. And they're in a taxi cab ride going to the conference. And Lemaitre tells Einstein, first of all, your physics is contrived. The equations really suggest a dynamic universe. You know it and we know it. But also, have you heard about this redshift data out in California? Because it's showing that the dynamic expanding universe is really what the heavens have talked back, in effect. And Einstein listened to Lemaitre and eventually made his way out at Hubble's invitation to Pasadena, California, and had a peek for himself through the Hooker 100-inch telescope.
Wow.
And came out and announced to the media after seeing this in his heavy German accent, he came out and said, I now see the necessity of a beginning.
Woo! I did not know that story. Like, I knew that the Big Bang Theory was pretty much invented by a Catholic priest or a monk or whatever. But I did not know he was with Einstein and he was talking with him. And wow, that's so fascinating. So amazing. I'm so glad that for scientists and people to learn and understand more about the universe. Because it doesn't scare me to know what these scientists are saying, what these amazing, smart, brilliant people are saying. Because every time I just think it just points to a creator.
And later explained that the value, this arbitrary value he chose for the cosmological constant, was the greatest mistake of his scientific career, because he allowed his philosophical presuppositions, his predilections, to determine his scientific theory rather than letting the evidence decide the question.
Woohoo! Wow. I wonder if a lot of atheists are thinking to themselves, like Einstein did. They're allowing their preconceptions towards a creator to get in their head. All Christians are dumb. They don't have any actual rationality within their mind. They just only think based off of what they were told to. They were brainwashed as a child, and even if they're super smart, they just have an agenda. They just lie. I get so many comments about John Lennox being some liar, a good storyteller, made up, having an agenda.
And anyways, a great moment in the history of science. It established what is now known as the Big Bang Theory, when you have this convergence of theoretical physics, general relativity with observational astronomy, and that in turn established that the universe had a beginning. Now, Einstein was not the only scientist at the time who didn't like this. Sir Arthur Eddington, a famous British astrophysicist, said this. He said, "Philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order is repugnant to me. I should like to find a genuine loophole. I simply do not believe the present order of things started off with a bang. The expanding universe is preposterous. It leaves me cold," he said. This in psychology is known as the theory of denial. You notice what the evidence he's citing? He's not citing it. He says, philosophically, he doesn't like it. And later physicists, because you have to ask, well, what's the big deal? Why are physicists so upset about the idea of a beginning? Princeton physicist Robert Dicke put it this way. He said, an infinitely old universe would relieve us of the necessity of explaining the origin of matter at any finite time in the past. If matter itself comes into existence, then you can't invoke matter as the cause of the origin of the material.
Oh my goodness, 100%. That's literally all Christians use to throw at atheism or materialists, because what created the beginning then? If there is no God, nothing, you can't say nothing, because everything has to have a creator. Something has to put something into motion. We all know that, according to our science today. Obviously, science is always evolving, because science is just things that, we kind of know. It means to know, right?
Universe. You need something that is immaterial, that transcends matter. And this conclusion was highlighted later in the 1960s by some work by Stephen Hawking. There's a bigger story here that I'm compressing, and maybe with Guillermo, we can talk a bit more about it. After the Big Bang was proposed, there were some other models proposed, the steady state model, the oscillating universe model. These were each attempts to preserve an infinite universe that didn't have a beginning. But one by one, as more observations of different kinds came online in astronomy, these were set aside as inadequate theories. And then in the mid-60s, there was an extraordinary development in theoretical physics. Stephen Hawking, probably know of him, wonderful, inspiring figure. The physicist confined to a wheelchair with the ALS disease. When he's working as a PhD student, he's working on black hole physics. And he's aware of the way that matter causes the space to curve. And he begins to and that's what he's thinking, okay, that's what's going on with a black hole. There's so much matter, it's curved so tightly, you can't get anything out. But he starts to apply this idea to the universe, and he's realizing that as the universe is going forward in time, matter's getting more and more dispersed. But as you wind that clock backwards again in your mind's eye, you eventually get to the point where the matter is so tightly curved, or the matter is so densely compact that space is getting tighter and tighter, more tightly curved in its curvature, and eventually the mathematics, something called the field equations of general relativity, which he and Roger Penrose solved, imply that there is an infinite curvature at some point in the finite past. Now, an infinite curvature corresponds to zero spatial volume. And then you have to ask what we discussed last night, how much stuff can you put in no space? And the answer is, well, no things go in no space. I mean, it's...
The singularity theorem. Now go work out the maths. That's wild and crazy.
So this singularity theorem has this profoundly anti-materialistic implication. And it happens that Hawking worked for much of the rest of his life to try to, as W.C. Fields put it, he was looking for a loophole. He was looking for a way around this conclusion. Hawking was a really interesting figure. He was a kind of theologically sensitive, even you could say God-obsessed atheist. And so he was aware of what he'd shown in 1968 with Penrose, but then he was developing other ideas, one called quantum cosmology, which we can discuss in the Q&A, and which I discuss at length in my new book, trying to find a way around this conclusion. But the straightforward application of general relativity to the origin of the universe implies a creation event.
Wow.
And
where GUV, I don't even understand this. Matter tells space-time how to curve space-time, tells matter how to move. Wow. So guys, that's absolutely fascinating. I encourage you to go subscribe to Stephen Meyer's channel and check out his book. It's super fascinating. The Return to the God Hypothesis and so many others. Super fascinating stuff. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast and making a massive difference for the scientific community and the Christian community. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to subscribe if you haven't. In the description below, you can click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today. It will be the best decision you could ever make.